We do have a ton to get through in this episode.
Common sense is finally prevailing.
There was controversy this month, Dave.
I'm not particularly excited by that.
Secrets and things on set.
I haven't told them anything.
I think this is just good times all round.
Every Doctor Who is liked by somebody, and that's a really good thing.
Davo, my doctor.
I know we disagree on this one.
First world problems, Dave.
I get why fans are asking those questions.
Oh gosh, that's actually quite a lot to talk about.
It doesn't compute.
It's the elephant in the room.
That's okay.
Fandom versus the BBC.
The cardinal sin.
Moving along.
Lunch. Hello and welcome to the Doctor Who show for the month of May 2023. He's Rob.
I am indeed, and you're Dave. You threw me there.
I just thought I'd do something different. We've been doing this for 8 years, so let's mix things up. And look, you're listening to the Doctor Who show. Tonight we are going to be talking about season 26. It's a deep dive into McCoy's last season, Classic Who's last season, as voted for by you, the listeners. But we've got news, we've got short topics, we've got a lot of feedback from you as well. Rob, are you well?
I am very well, Dave, and I'm itching to go. This is going to be a good one, I think.
No, I think it is. Look, I'm here. Winter is definitely approaching in Australia. It is dark, cold and wet, but that's fine. We have Doctor Who to keep us going, and so we'll dive straight in. First of all, Rob, since we last recorded, I have been to Sydney. I have met Sophie Aldred. I've hung out with Phil and Dwayne from the Sirens of Audio podcast, and because there's a lot to say about that, I think we've agreed we're going to do a dedicated special episode on that, hopefully in the next week or so.
Yes. We have hinted about it on Twitter saying, look, we'll talk about it on the show, but it won't be this show, folks. It's going to be its own show, an extravaganza.
Yeah, absolutely. It's far too much to do as a short topic. It would take over most of the episode. So keep an eye out for that coming soon, because I have a lot to say about what was a really fun day and a really fun experience. But that said, we are, by coincidence, talking about season 26, and I may throw a few, well, Sophie told me, comments into the mix.
Name dropper.
Absolutely, if you can, why not? I said we had a lot of news. Let's dive in. A trailer has dropped, Rob.
It has indeed.
And it has given us a small little taste of the specials that are to come with David Tennant and Catherine Tate. It leads with a line, "Why did this face come back?" Well, because our RTD cast David Tennant, that's the reason. I guess there'll be more to it than that. Maybe this is going to be the arc of these 3 episodes. Why is this Doctor come back? Which I think we kind of speculated about anyway, didn't we?
Yeah, a lot of fans have as well. But as to why he's come back, who knows?
Yeah, so I think that's going to be a bit of a thing across the episodes. Look, it showed us that people we expected to be in it are going to be in it. Neil Patrick Harris is now trailer official. I think we pretty well knew that. We'd seen set photos. But we did learn the names of the episodes, Rob. Starbeast.
Yes, which we all assume is based on a comic, which I'll talk about a bit later in this show.
Yes, Wild Blue Yonder.
The Neil Patrick Harris episode could mean anything.
And the final one is The Giggle.
Yeah, that's intriguing. That's got a lot of people saying, what's all that about?
It is. Look, when I first saw the trailer, I thought it was just Giggle, but now I know it is The Giggle, so that means, is it a planet? Is it a life form? Is it a monster? Is it a person? Is it a Time Lord? Who knows? It's like
something DC would do about the Joker. It sounds like a comic series, like The Giggle. It sounds sinister.
Yeah, look, it does a bit, and look, it's Doctor Who. It's a regen story, so it's going to be dark in some level. I mean, the Doctor, I assume, and look, we've made assumptions before and been wrong about all this wild cape we're on now, but I assume we're getting Ncuti Gatwa, the 15th Doctor, at the end of this, so The Giggle joins a long line of stories like Planet of the Spiders and the War Games. And The Giggle.
Well, one thing we know for sure, Dave, and this is absolutely for sure, the footage of Ncuti Gatwa saying, "Can someone tell me what the hell is going on?" And he's just against a background of clouds and such. There is actual background to him there, and they covered it over with clouds. RTD has said this. So, as to not spoil us, there is something going on behind him when he says, "What's going on here?" But in that clip, it just looks like some clouds.
That's very clever. That's Marvel levels of deception and caution.
I know.
It's going back to, the trailer for Infinity War where they edited out some of the Infinity Stones from Thanos' gauntlet so we wouldn't have plot spoilers. That's intense. So look, I don't plan to speculate any further about the trailer. It's there. It's got some shots. It doesn't really tell us anything about the episodes. I'm ready to dive in when the time comes.
Very good.
You have some, I won't say sad news, that's over the top, but disappointing news for us, Rob.
Yeah, I do, Dave. I mentioned on last month's show that I'd confirmed with Universal down here that it had no plans to release Season 9 of Classic Doctor Who, so we made a YouTube video about it and so on, threw it out there, 13,000 hits, good stuff. We now have put out a sequel to that video because one of our listeners wrote a letter to Universal, a proper snail mail letter, and got a proper snail mail reply to the effect that Universal is not just doing Season 9 of Classic Doctor Who anytime soon, it's actually bailing on Doctor Who completely. It's done. The market's too rough, this letter says, literally, to our listener. This is all in the video. So we put out the video with that news. That's had thousands of hits too, and it's basically vindication because in that first video, I was saying, look, folks, here's a situation. I recommend you buy Season 9 from the UK. And I was kind of sticking my neck out there because at the time, Universal could have popped up and said, psych, it's just late. We're doing it 3 months from now, or something like that. And then I would have made all these people buy very expensive UK copies for nothing. But this second video hammers it home on paper from Universal. Universal is done. And there's no cavalry on the horizon. It's a very different situation to the handover between Roadshow and Universal back in 2019 when Roadshow said, look, we're giving it up, and Universal put their hand up and said, yeah, we know, and we're taking it on. There's just nothing on the horizon. So are we without Doctor Who on physical media going forward, or will a distributor pop up in months ahead? Will they go back and do Season 9? All those questions are still up in the air, Dave.
Yeah, look, that is disappointing news, but I can't say it's news that shocks us, and we did talk about this at length on the last episode. I did have an extraordinary experience in Sydney where during one of the early breaks in the day, I was standing fairly near a merchandise dealer and somebody was on their phone watching a video. And out of this guy's phone, I heard your voice. And I sort of turned and looked at this guy sort of like, okay, that's weird. Yeah. And he was obviously chatting to the guy who was behind the table stand, and the guy behind the table stand said, yes, that's your podcasting partner. And it's like, okay, not only did you know who he was, you know who I am, that's my partner. And that was really quite a bizarre experience. And he said, we've been talking about the video Rob put out, and this guy who had multiple copies of Season 24 Blu-ray on his table said, I'm kind of with you. These things just aren't selling in Australia. Anybody who buys them wholesale always has leftover copies. You go into any DVD store or Blu-ray store in the country, and there's always spare copies of Doctor Who Blu-rays on special at reduced rates. So I think that the market just isn't quite there for the numbers they need to make a big, sumptuous Blu-ray box set. And so that was, it was very interesting. I think genuinely this has been a big topic of conversation.
You hadn't told me that story before. I'm quite amazed to hear that, actually. Wow.
Yes, I wanted to get your live reaction to that.
Yeah, that's a wow moment. But look, yeah, it's all about the revenue, and possibly a smaller distributor can come on. Friend of the show, Brendan Jones, suggested Network could come on board because they put out some pretty niche stuff in some very nice packaging. I've thrown out Madman. You might agree with Madman as well, Dave, as possibly a distributor who would be interested with smaller revenues, but we just don't have any news on that.
No, Network did do the Goodies box set, which we'd been waiting on for a long time. They've also done a lot of those very obscure BBC sitcoms, so stuff like No Job for a Lady, that sort of thing that you can really, very, very niche audiences. So yeah, they're definitely one that might do it and might do not quite as sexy a package. It might be a slightly watered down package, but still a thorough package. And look, Madman is also definitely a possibility. He has a long track record with Doctor Who. I remember Tim from Madman when he was just a single retailer working out of a little warehouse in Melbourne, where we'd just pop along, and he was sort of importing. He imported a lot of stuff. His biggest imports were manga and porn. But the stuff you couldn't get in a normal DVD shop, basically.
Yeah.
But he also would import a lot of the special stuff like B5, Trek, Doctor Who, where fans wanted UK or American copies quicker and better quality than the local Australia knockoffs. So I do remember Madman going back to last century and popping along to get my Doctor Who tapes from him, and he's now a very successful distributor of movies and pop culture generally.
Absolutely. I think the anime side of the business has recently spun off to be Crunchyroll in Australia, but he still has all the movies and TV show sort of side of distribution as Madman. So
yeah. Anime was definitely where he sort of made it big. But yeah, he's very good at sort of picking things that don't have a large audience but have a dedicated audience where you're going to sell some tickets or sell some copies.
Yeah, or is Disney just blocking physical media sales outside of the UK? Who knows?
Yeah, look, who knows? Look, as we discussed on Twitter, Rob, we actually still don't know a lot about the Disney BBC Doctor Who deal.
No.
We know that the BBC gets to broadcast New Who in the UK. We know that Disney will broadcast new episodes of Doctor Who outside of the UK, but outside of the UK, who has classic Doctor Who ownership, who has physical media ownership, who has seasons 1 to 13 of Doctor Who new series. Like, we don't quite know whether Disney starts at year 0 with the next episode, or it goes back to 2005, or does it go back to 1963? We don't know.
It's a mystery.
It is a mystery. Something that's not a mystery is what Frazer Hines' next project is going to be, and he is releasing a novelisation of Evil of the Daleks. This dropped very recently, just in the last few days. I'm not quite sure what it is. Now, we know that John Peel did the Target novelisation back in the mid-90s. This is apparently Frazer Hines' version, or one in which Frazer Hines dropped in a few paragraphs to a ghostwritten copy. I don't know. The blurb tends to suggest it's not a pure novelisation of Evil of the Daleks. It starts with the moment at the end of Will in Space where the Doctor is showing Zoe the Evil of the Daleks that says Jamie has to relive it, but suddenly they're off on a whole different adventure, and no one's quite sure what that means. It doesn't come out to the 26th of August. It's going to be out in hardback and audio. This could be really, really cool, or it could be an absolutely cynical money spinner. I'm going to perhaps wait for a few more details and a few more reviews before I rush out and pre-order this.
I'll say one thing about it, Dave. It's got a beautiful cover.
It has got a beautiful cover. That is very true.
It looks fantastic to look at because we've got that old logo back, of course, on all the new Who merchandise now. The Evil of the Daleks is written in a really shaky kind of 1960s script. The drawings of Jamie, the Doctor, Victoria, amazing. So it looks good, I can say that much. But as to why you would do this, it's a bit different. I'll say that much too.
Look, has Frazer just always been thinking, I've got a book in me and this is it? I don't know. Is this his follow-up to Farms, Fillies and Fornicating, whatever his book was, his biography? I can't remember. We'll find out.
We will. Dave, I've got one piece of news to finish, and it's a quick one. The Paul Spragg Short Trips contest is open at Big Finish, folks. It's open for about another month as I speak. This, of course, is a contest named after a Big Finish employee who passed away far too young many years ago, and it searches for new talent via short story writing, and the winner gets their story actually produced as a Big Finish short trip. So if you think you have a cracking Doctor Who short story idea and can bang out a synopsis of it and a bit of a sample of how you would write the story, throw it all together. There's still time, or you'll be waiting another year to do it. Don't say, I didn't warn you.
Very cool. I know a couple of people I follow on Twitter are thinking about putting something together. Are you thinking of putting something together, Rob?
Funnily enough, this year I am, Dave. In past years, it's come up, and I've gone, I should do that, and then I've just not had the time, or just not a really killer idea in my head. And this year, I have the killer idea, and I'm actually writing the thing, and I've written 2,500 words of it. I want to actually write the full 5,000-word story before I submit, just so that I know I've done it.
Very nice.
I don't want to submit a synopsis and then have Nick Briggs call and say, okay, write the thing, Rob. And then I have a mental blank. That would be a nightmare. I'm not saying I'm going to win the competition by any means, but it would be my nightmare. So I'm going in with the whole thing.
Good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much. If I don't win, I'll farm it out to a fanzine or something so it gets out there somehow.
Yes. I won't be.
Okay.
I enjoy writing, but I'm very good at writing non-fiction. And whenever I try to write fiction, it very quickly starts to read like non-fiction again. I just don't really have that quite that speed in me. So I'll stick to my lane, I think.
I'll tell you one thing. As I've started writing, I've switched into target mode, like 1980s target mode. And it's actually really fun to read back. I'm like, I really absorbed something in those teenage years. I can write target books.
Does anybody in your book, in your story, have a shock of white hair or an old young face?
No, but I won't say what doctor it is.
Fair enough.
Yes.
On to short topics, and I'll kick us off. Before I watched all of season 26 for this podcast, I did take your advice, Rob, and went and bought a UK copy of season 9, which actually arrived in pretty prompt time. Mm-hmm. And I got out and I watched that. And I did enjoy watching it. There's some good stories in there. I've got to say, it did reaffirm for me that of the 5 Pertwee seasons, season 9 is probably quite comfortably the weakest. I don't think it's terrible. As I say, there's some good stories, but it is the one that I think has a little bit of a weaker average and doesn't quite have the big classics that the other Pertwee seasons do. But even a middle order Pertwee is a very, very good story. His era just bats so deep, which is really cool. Day of the Daleks was good to see again, although I do think watching it again that it is probably the weaker of the Pertwee Dalek stories, which probably makes it the weaker of the Dalek stories from the first 3 Doctors, if I'm honest, but that's not bad. That's a pretty good average for the Daleks if this is its low point.
Oh, for sure. I quite like it, actually.
Yeah, I quite like it. I just don't think it's quite as good as all the other Dalek stories because most of them are absolutely brilliant. This is just mostly brilliant.
Yeah.
Curse of Paladin, though, is absolutely brilliant. That just looks sumptuous. It's gorgeous. It works so well. It did occur to me watching it, though, that for all of this is an allegory of the UK's entry into the common market. Most of it has actually got nothing to do with the UK's entry into the common market. That's kind of a bit of a framing sort of concept, and then it's really just about this adventure on Peladon, and with some aliens, it's not really quite the big allegory that I think, fan legend says it is, but that was good.
It's one of those things that people have seized on and just repeat. Possibly they haven't even seen it themselves, but they just know to say it about that episode.
Yeah, that's right. The Sea Devils is really good. I don't know whether that or Curse is the peak of the season, but it's definitely one of those two. It's a shame the Sea Devils don't quite have the characterization the Silurians did. They are sort of generic monster sidekicks to the Master, which is, that's fine. That's what that season's doing, or that's what that story's doing, but it's okay. Look, I got to the mutants. I really did try and give the mutants a fresh look, but by the end of part 1, I was just sitting there going, we're at the end of part 1, we've already had colonialism, apartheid, ecology, pollution, mutations, an assassination plot, and I'm just like, this is kind of bonkers, and none of it's really making a lot of sense, and it is just that Bob Baker and Dave Martin just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. In this case, it is a bit of a mess, and it's also one of the very, very few Barry Letts produced stories that I think looks cheap. Now, a lot of Pertwee stories look like they were made in the 70s because they were.
Yeah.
But they never really look cheap. They look like sort of the cutting edge of what the BBC in the 70s could do. This just looks as though a lot of things just haven't quite worked. The set design just hasn't quite worked. The costumes are just a little bit ordinary, etc., etc. It all just doesn't quite come together. So that I still don't quite rate the mutants. Got to the Time Monster, and at the end of part 2, I was like, gee, this is actually worse than I remembered it. Then I watched part 3 and 4, and I thought, oh yeah, this isn't too bad. Maybe it really is just the opening. And I've got to say, you get to part 5, and I thought, did somebody change the entire production crew, writing, cast? It's like it's a whole new story. Suddenly when they get to ancient Atlantis, it's this brilliant, mythological, poetic, nuanced, emotional, really, really deep and interesting story with some really good production. And by the time you get to the moment where Dalios has been killed and Galia realises just how the Master has really manipulated her into killing her husband, and then he destroys her entire nation, I was really like, wow, this is really, really good. And then that final scene with Kronos as the angelic woman rather than just the guy in the bird costume. Again, that was really quite profound. And that real idea of the twisted logic of Kronos, that he'll ask very literally in a very twisted way, he'll grant what you ask for. I think, it was really, really clever. So There's some great stuff in the Time Monster, and there's some terrible stuff in the Time Monster. So, a mixed bag for the season. Fun to watch it back. I love the Pertwee era. Even bad Pertwee's good. This is the least good Pertwee for me.
Fair enough. Dave, while you were watching Season 9, I've been making videos. I put one out just recently. Did the Fifth Doctor really wear a cricket outfit that I've been talking about or perhaps threatening to release for a while? I believe you've seen it?
I have seen it, and I was genuinely surprised by the fact the answer wasn't, did the Fifth Doctor wear a cricket costume? Yes. Goodbye. You went into some really deep research there.
I really did. There's 20 minutes of it, folks, so give that a look if that sounds interesting. And also, the other day, I got inspired and thought, you know what, with the Star Beast coming for the 60th anniversary, and I promised earlier in the show I'd talk about this, what if I get a bunch of panels from the 1980 comic strip? Actually, it's a reprint of that comic strip because it's in colour. In Doctor Who Weekly, it was in black and white. And I'll take some photos of these and I'll throw them into the video. And basically, I'll tell the story of the Star Beast so that those out there who don't own copies of Doctor Who Weekly or any of the reprints of the comic can get a quick 5-minute wham bam, thank you ma'am, appraisal of what the story's all about, so that when it comes out this November, they can say, hey, that stuck to the comic. Or perhaps more likely, hey, that didn't stick to the comic. But I'm thinking it'll be a bit of a mix. I'm thinking it will stick to the comic in some areas. Some of the scenes we've even seen in the trailer could come straight from the comic. So that is out there. If you've never read, heard of, whatever, the Star Beast, I've made a video about it. Go to the Doctor Who Show YouTube channel. Thank you.
Yes. Now, I haven't watched that one.
Okay.
Because my thinking is, when we come to do our hot take on the Star Beast, it will be interesting if you go in as now a bit of an expert on the comic, and I go in having never read the comic or knowing anything about the comic, and seeing if that skews our perceptions of this story.
Interesting idea. Okay, so I'll mark you down to watch it after the 60th anniversary.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Good. Very good.
As well as watching some Doctor Who, I have listened to some Doctor Who. I had a trip to Sydney and also a trip out to Bendigo over the last couple of weekends. So a bit of time to listen to some Big Finish. Because I was going to interview John Blum in Sydney, I did listen to John Blum's Fearmonger, and that was a very early Big Finish with Sophie Aldred and Sylvester McCoy. And I thought that hung together really well. It actually felt as though RTD pinched a couple of ideas from it for years and years, which was interesting. So I enjoyed that. I then did follow up. I thought I really, quite enjoyed that Sylvester Sophie one. What's another one I could listen to? And Colditz jumped out at me as like, oh, that sounds interesting. I like the idea of Colditz in World War II. Mm-hmm. And so I listened to Colditz, and that's one of the best Big Finishes I think I've listened to. I thought that was a really strong adventure. The twists worked really, really well in that just as I was reaching the conclusion myself based on the clues and the evidence, it would then come onto the plot and be sort of revealed. So that's how I like it. McCoy was great. Aldred was great. I thought that was a really, really strong Big Finish. I'm really pleased I listened to that one.
Yeah, that's popular with fans too, I believe.
Yeah, okay, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
And I also did a re-listen to the adaptation of the new adventure Nightshade, which I haven't listened to since it first came out. And look, that was very enjoyable. Your mate Samuel Barnett is in it, and look, to his credit, I wouldn't have recognised him if I didn't know he was in it. He plays a very different character to what he normally plays.
Interesting. And
look, it's enjoyable. I do think that it suffers more than most of the novel adaptations from going over to audio. I think that the cuts that have to be made to the plot are a bit more obvious in this one. And once again, a bit like All Consuming Fire I mentioned a few months ago, a lot of that imagery that you can really conjure with careful language and prose in the books doesn't quite come across the same in the audio, which is a shame. I don't think it quite holds together as well as something like The Higher Science or Love and War, but it's still a great adventure.
Excellent. Well, to round out short topics, I've got another bit of self-promotion here. I don't normally self-promote like this, folks, but it's another box ticked, I suppose, in my Doctor Who fandom. I've had an article published in Celestial Toy Room, which is the fanzine of the DWAS over in the UK, and it's all about Doctor Who podcasting, what I think of it in general, the diversity in the space, how to find Doctor Who podcasts, all of that stuff. It's something I actually wrote a year ago, probably longer. Dashed it off one night, didn't think much about it. And Doc over at the Diddly Dum podcast actually mentioned it to me on Facebook recently. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm not actually a paid-up member of the DWAS anymore, so I had no idea that was out. Reading it over, I should have given it maybe another edit. There's even a few things the DWAS guys could have tweaked, like me mentioning that it was 2022 and things like that. But, oh well, it's out there. And if you subscribe to DWAS and get Celestial Toy Room, you'll see an article from me in it and my thoughts on Doctor Who podcasting.
Excellent. Well, we've smashed through that because we have a whole season of Doctor Who to dive into.
We sure do.
So, look, we put it out onto our Twitter feed a few weeks ago and said, which of our nominees do you want us to talk about? Now, Matt Smith's Season 7A got 12.9% of the vote. Mm-hmm. Davo's Season 19 was winning for a while, but ended up with 19.7% of the vote.
It was early leader.
It was the early leader. Then the Pertwee Season 8 took over the lead. That ended with 33.3% of the vote, but with 0.8% higher, Sylvester McCoy's Season 26 was the winner at the point where the poll seized up and stopped taking votes.
Yes, for the second time we've done a poll in recent times, folks. For some reason, it would not accept votes. So the actual result could have been different. It might not have been different. Who knows? But I've looked around Twitter troubleshooting sites, and for the life of me, I can't find any information on this phenomenon. But it's happened to us twice now. It's a real thing. Yeah,
we still had, I think, about 180 votes. So we were at the tail end of the poll.
Oh, yeah, look, it might have been another 20 votes, but with how close McCoy and Pertwee were, it would have been fascinating to see what happened in the end.
Yeah, look, it would have, but McCoy did win, and the reason why I nominated Season 26 was, well, look, there are a couple of reasons. One, I know that there are a lot of our listeners who are of a similar vintage to us and for whom McCoy was their doctor, particularly fans who grew up in the UK, and so they didn't have the repeats that we did, and the McCoy era was mixed in very well with the Tommy era and the Pertwee era and all the rest of it. People for whom this was the McCoy era, I think, do hold it in very high regard, and I know a lot of those people do listen to us, so I thought it was fair to give them a chance to hear something about their favourite Doctor. But also, this is a season that is almost mythical in status in Doctor Who fandom. It's the one that everybody says is fantastic. The show finished on a high. The show was just getting great again when it got axed. And I thought, I haven't watched this season for a long time, so let's watch it again, kind of interrogate that, and see what I think of it, because I know I didn't listen to this when I bought the Blu-rays. I think I was either busy or I was probably watching another season for the podcast or doing hot takes or something. So I never got around to watching it. So this is the first time I've watched the Blu-rays as well. So it has been a while. And for at least one of these stories, it's been a very long time. And I'll talk about that when we get to it.
Yes. Well, I had watched it when the Blu-rays came out. So this is my second time in a relatively short period, I guess.
No, that's good. When did you see it first, Rob?
Dave, I came to this season as a 14-year-old back in 1989 who'd been in fandom proper for some years at this point. So I wasn't seeing it for the first time with adult eyes by any means, but for sure as someone who wasn't really a young kid anymore, and I was learning to be more critical of what works and what doesn't in Doctor Who and I guess TV in general, and I knew who the current crop of writers were and who the script editor was, and how music is important to a story, and making all those little connections, simple as they might seem, like, oh, the guy who wrote Remembrance of the Daleks is back. That makes me interested in seeing his story. The kind of stuff we do today, easy as breathing, but at this stage for me in fandom back in 1989, this is all stuff I'm still learning as I go from passive, oh, I'll watch anything sort of viewer to, I know a thing or two about this stuff, sort of fanboy. And vitally, can I underline, this is all pre-internet as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's back in the days of very primitive fandom, looking back now. I saw Battlefield and the Curse of Fenric at the local Doctor Who Club's Christmas event in December of 1989. So thanks to Mark from 42 to Doomsday's pen friend, we got those tapes out in time for our Christmas party. So I was there with 80, 90 fans in a very large hall at Melbourne Uni watching these two stories, and that's a really strong memory of mine. I believe that the club showed Ghostlight and Survival at a meeting in March, which, for the love of me, I don't remember being there, and I have no idea why. And apparently I'm speaking to Mark and Robin Richard. They all said that Paul Cornell came to that meeting, so I definitely don't remember that happening. So I don't know where I was in March 1990, but I wasn't at the Doctor Who Club meeting, so I did see Ghostlight and Survival go out just on ABC TV at 5:30 Monday to Fridays, and that was in October, November of 1990. I did look that up and find that out. So we got it a full year after the UK, which was about typical.
Right, yeah. And just offhand, now that you mentioned Cornell in Australia, I think that might be the visit he made down here where he got the idea to set goth opera in Tasmania.
It could be. He made 2 visits, so it could be that one or it could be the next one. But yes, I know he may have made more visits. I know he did 2 to Melbourne and visited the club. So, yes, he had been out there around that time.
Yeah. Just to rewind, though, to my comment about this being all pre-internet, you would have to learn about stuff, folks. You'd have to learn through being in these fan clubs and talking to fans and seeing the pirate tapes and reading Dwim. We didn't have JNT turning up on breakfast TV to tell us the new season was coming, or the Doctor appearing on Blue Peter. We didn't even have Blue Peter, full stop. So you really had to hunt for knowledge in those days and really sort of know what you were about to see this stuff in line with the UK, or as in line with the UK as you could be. And I think that was part of the fun back then, Dave. You had to be active, you had to be on the ball. So it was kind of an exciting time when I think back to when I first saw this.
Yeah, absolutely. We were that level of isolation, sort of, and separatism from UK fandom. To give an example, when I was looking up some of the old local fanzines about this, the issue that would have been coming out as Survival was broadcasting in the UK still says definitively that the fourth story of this season is called Cat Flap. So we didn't even have the correct story titles right up until broadcast.
Yeah, I remember those titles, yeah.
Yeah, so look, I have good memories of it. I do mostly remember enjoying it go out, with a few important caveats, which we'll talk as we dive in. Now, Rob, do you want to start on Battlefield, or do you want me to?
I'll kick off, Dave.
Please, go for it.
I've got a lot to say, but I'll do a little bit of a pause after I have my opening salvo. Okay. It will be a salvo, because it's an interesting one here, isn't it? The story, I think, in Battlefield is quite sound. Personally, I like Arthurian legend. I like the way this uses it with a bit of a twist and brings back the brig and this updated, proper UN-style unit. All of that is really neat. But on the screen, it's just embarrassing to look at for long stretches. The acting is often woeful. If you said to me, pick a story from this season to introduce someone to Doctor Who with, it would not be this one. And yet this is the big, let's kick off the season story. You can just tell they want lightning to strike twice. Like, oh, Ben, you brought it home with the debut story of season 25. Let's do that again. And it just doesn't work. McCoy's doing his worst shouty acting of any story. The unit Range Rover looks like it was some kind of non-military green colour, and they've tried to make it camo, and it just looks woeful. It even has velour seats, Dave, betraying that it's some kind of family wagon from somewhere, just done up a bit. Yet elsewhere, they do have proper military vehicles in the episodes too. It's just strange, and I'll stop there.
That was a salvo.
I have another.
Okay. I went into Battlefield knowing that I enjoy this story, and I've always enjoyed this story. I also went in very aware that this is the one that a lot of fans don't enjoy and is fairly regularly picked out as the one that doesn't stand up to the quality of the rest of the season. And indeed, last night when I put a quick poll on Twitter and said, what's your favourite story from season 26, Battlefield did come last. It was very tight between 4th, 3rd and 2nd, and then a big gap in first one with about 50% of the vote. But Battlefield was last. And so I went into this one kind of trying to cast a critical eye over it. Now, I will say I still enjoyed this story. I think, for the most part, it actually looks quite good. I think the filming is really good. There's lots of great light. There's lots of good ideas. I like the Merlin concept, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. I think there's some good stuff in here. Angela Bruce is great as Bambera. There's good stuff. But I did notice as I watched it that I could see why this wouldn't necessarily work for everybody. And you are right, there's a real heightened manner and a laboured manner in the way that this story is done, as though a lot of people in the cast have decided, well, we're doing Arthurian legend, so let's pretend this is Shakespeare. And so there's a lot of, we are acting on the stage acting. The chap who plays Ancelin and the chap who plays Mordred, they have some good moments, but there is a lot of that. I think that McCoy and Aldred also do have some moments where it's just a little bit, that was an interesting choice there, Silver. I'm not sure I like that. So I did see that thing, and I think if that wasn't something that you were okay with, I could see that would really take you out of the story. Now, I was okay with it. I could kind of reveled in it in some ways. So I like it, but yes, I think I appreciated more where people perhaps like yourself are coming from.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into Salvo too, because you mentioned people doing it like Shakespeare. The battles are so badly choreographed. It's like what you'd see at the local amateur dramatic society. I used to remember in year 11 and 12 we'd get taken down there to see Shakespeare, and there'd sometimes be sword fights and things, and they were just like the sword fights in Battlefield.
Yeah, you can literally see the actors do pose 1, pose 2, pose 3.
Yeah. And the knight's weapons look stupid with the sparkler effects. And when Bambera shouts that they should run into battle with style, I'm thinking, where the actual F did that line come from? Like, she's this serious by-the-book type for the whole show. Then suddenly she spouts this line, let's do it with style! Like she's the Joker in a Batman comic or something. And it might have felt cool to type in the script for Aronovich, but on screen it's totally cringe. And that's just like one thing I've pulled out of many that I could mention. It's just like, cringe, cringe, cringe. But I like the story, Dave.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think that Bambera is, again, one of those characters you either get that we're just going for a bit of an over-the-top sort of fun character, or you go, no, this is stupid. And I think it's one of those lines you're going to fall one side or the other of, and that's fair enough. I do like the concept of the Doctor as being Merlin in the future, and I do really like that denouement where the Doctor from the future has written himself a letter, and I think it's really good, and I don't think it's Battlefield's fault that would become an over-the-top trope over the season, and then a really overused and often badly used thing in the new adventures over the next 10 years. I think it's not Battlefield's fault, 'cause I think it's really cleverly done here, and I like all of that aspect of the plot, and I like the Destroyer. I think the Destroyer's a really cool concept. Looks great, acted great, lots of menace. It did strike me this time that he actually doesn't do anything.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I'm going to destroy the world soon, any time now. I'm really going to do it.
I mean, I've always sort of thought of him as this thing that's sort of in the back half of the story, but really he's only in the last episode, and he's only freed by Morgaine for about a minute and a half before the Brigadier shoots him.
Yeah. Apparently, they were going to do it slightly differently. He was going to be some sort of, like, guy in a suit, and then he would transform into the Destroyer. But apparently that all got messed up and they couldn't do the effect or something. But apparently there was going to be some sort of transformation where he'd appear quite normally at first and then change. But regardless, it's an excellent costume. It does look very effective.
Yeah, and I don't think the cliffhanger to episode 3 would have worked if it wasn't that mask.
No, probably not. Here's a guy in a suit.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Sophie did say, this is my first of my Sophie said moments.
Yes.
Sophie did say that Ben Aronovich was really ashamed of this story and really didn't like how it turned out, and he's still sort of, quite doesn't like to talk about it, which I think is a shame. And if you listen to the commentary, it's him and Sophie and Andrew Cartmel, and Ben and Cartmel, who were both incredibly young, very new writers when they wrote this, are looking back at the DVD commentary with sort of about 20 years of experience, and they're saying, well, of course, now we'll do this differently, and of course, when it went from 3 parts to 4 parts, all we did was sort of spread it out, whereas we should have made part 1 still part 1, and da-da-da-da, and then, Sophie says in the commentary, well, I really enjoy it, guys, like, stop bringing it down. But I can kind of see where Ben Aronovich would look back at it and go, if I was doing this with a little bit more maturity and more experience, there is a layer of polish that I would put on it. But it's still, look, it's not Remembrance of the Daleks, but I think it's still a pretty good script. And where he hits the lines, he hits them really, really well. Like, I always laugh at that line where Sophie comes out of the water. First of all, the moment where she just comes out of the water with a sword is just really funny and cool, but just that bit where she hands over Angela and Excalibur and, here, you can be King of England. 'Tis Excalibur. That's what I said, Shakespeare. Like, yeah. I really like all those sort of lines. When he hits it, he hits it. He just doesn't hit it quite as often as he does in Remembrance. But I enjoyed this clearly more than you did.
Yeah, and look, again, I emphasise it's not the story itself. I think the story Aronovich is trying to tell is good. It's just the way it's thrown up there on the screen with the acting, the direction, the music, the sets. All of that stuff brings it down, you know. I'd be embarrassed by it too if I was the writer. I think this could look much better.
Yeah, I don't think he should be embarrassed. I just get that he would write it better now.
Okay.
And I'm giving it a B.
I'm giving it 2 out of 5.
Okay, cool. So that's 4 out of 10. Okay, cool.
Yes.
I'm just trying to translate into the metric system. Okay, cool. A B and a 2 out of 5. Mm-hmm. That brings me to Ghostlight.
Yes.
Now, just as I went into Battlefield as a story that I enjoy and I wanted to try and appreciate why people didn't, I went into Ghostlight knowing this is a story that I have struggled with, but equally knowing that this is a story that its fans are very, very passionate about. Mm-hmm. People who like this story talk about it as the best of the season, often the best of the era, and in some cases the best of the series, or at least in the top 10s. People are very, very passionate about this story. So I really went in trying to see it again through their eyes. And I got part of the way there. I agree this is a brilliant production for the most part. It looks amazing. It looks great. It's very well filmed. The lighting is fantastic. The cast is fantastic. The ideas are really genuinely clever, and there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of subtlety and nuance to it. And some of those lines are really brilliantly clever and funny.
Yeah.
But I still don't think it quite works, and it still doesn't quite hold up. I think that the explanations are all there, but unless you really know what they are and you've had time to think about them, it's not quite there. There is a little bit too much in this story, particularly for a 3-parter. The subplot of, for example, where they suddenly want to kill Queen Victoria because that means they can take over the world or something. I don't know whether that's meant to be an ironic thing or a parody thing, or there's another level of meaning that I'm missing there. But to me, I was just sitting there by part 3 going, what's that about?
Yeah.
And there's just a few too many of those little bits that don't quite hold up or that don't quite work. I mean, for an example, the idea that Josiah is the survey and Control is the scientific control. So he goes out and turns into the native life form and then comes back and gets compared to Control. I think he's like what is meant to be going on.
Yes.
It's a clever idea. I don't think they do it on screen. Why does Reverend Matthew suddenly turn into a monkey? Like, why is that? Like, it's a great image. It's a great idea, but why does that happen? And yes, there are lots of really cool lines, and some of them are brilliant and work well. There are others where I just go, that line has no relevance to what's going on at all. Mark Platt just wanted to throw in a clever line.
Yeah, like with the Reverend, obviously they're trying to make a statement like, oh, look, the man of God, we've regressed him back to a monkey because humans came from monkeys, haha. But wouldn't he have regressed back into an infant if he was regressing? You know, like how does his whole DNA change?
Yeah. Look, as I say, I get what they're going for. I just don't quite get the how and the why. Like, just I have that power. Is it an effect of the ship underneath, or is it an effect of light? I don't know. Again, it's a really cool image, and I remember watching it for the first time at the age of 10, going out at 5:30 and going, "Wow, that's a really striking moment." When they reveal him, they go, "Oh, that's a really striking thing," and I think it's great. I just watching it again, I'm going, "But why?"
Yeah. Dave, I think this one is the flip side of the coin to Battlefield. I think the script is a little undercooked here, whereas I like the script and the story idea behind Battlefield.
That's interesting.
You know, there's all sorts of stuff that to me isn't thought through. Like, you talk about Control. Why is Control given a newspaper every day if she's Control and locked up and not meant to be changing because she's Control? Why are they giving her all this information from the world that she's locked up from? I mean, sorry to spoil it for people, but why is that happening?
Yeah, and again, it's obviously because they want that really kooky imagery
Yes.
of the Victorian butler giving a monster a paper.
Yes.
And it's a great image.
But it makes no sense,
But
given
it makes
what
no sense.
control
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
You know, why is there a day staff who are normal and a hypnotised night staff? Why haven't the day staff found the night staff hiding in all the cupboards when they're cleaning? In fact, how much work is there for the day staff anyway? I don't know. There's also this sense of, did I just micro-sleep and miss something? All the way through it. And yet, in spite of all that, it looks great. And I think the acting is really good on the whole. Even the little musical number that comes across as jaunty yet disturbing. That's great.
Yes.
And as you've sort of already mentioned, this is all credit to the BBC being able to do these period pieces like no one else on earth. You want an old house interior? Boom, you've got it. From the creepy basement level with all the old toys through the house. The lighting, as you mentioned, is amazing. The way they let some scenes be really dark in that first episode is something I know Davo would rant and rave about as being impossible in his era. He'd say, they can't do that. People have complained that their TV sets were broken.
Well, in fact, Janet Fielding on the Behind the Sofa makes exactly that point.
Right. Yet here, some of the scenes are incredibly dark, Dave, and I think that's probably what you were referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, look, all told, I like the idea of what Ghostlight is trying to do. I'm still gobsmacked that this was considered children's television in the 80s. And I was there for this, folks, back in the 80s. I'm still surprised. Compared to what passes for children's TV today, this is like something from another dimension. You really need to watch it closely. You need to think. And again, it looks great. I just think it's a shame the script needs to do more work to really get the story across in a more, effortless sort of way so that people can just sit back and relax and enjoy it.
Yeah, and look, I did for the first time watch the cutscenes that are on the Blu-ray. I don't know if they're on the DVD or not, but certainly they're on the Blu-ray, and the quality of them is quite varied, so I see why they didn't do a restored version or a director's cut or whatever you want to call it, an extended edition.
Yeah.
But again, there are some little bits in there, like, for example, you get to see that the glowing eyes of the toys is Josiah looking through a little viewer thing and being able to see through them. So that kind of means that it wasn't just being done for creepy. There was a practical reason behind it.
Right.
But most of the rest of it is just sort of more of the same. It's some very cool lines cut away, but not explanation. So look, it's interesting you say the script, because the script to me is very clever. But you're right. I think it doesn't quite hold together, as brilliant as a lot of the production is. Final question from me on this story, Rob.
Yeah.
Like or didn't like the performance?
I don't like it, to be honest.
No, me either.
Yeah.
I get that he's going for something a bit different and a bit kooky, but I think that after a couple of takes, the director should have gone, no, can you lower your voice a bit and try and go a little bit more conventionally bad, and look, good that they're doing something different and they're sort of playing against expectations. And there'll be fans for who they go, yeah, wow, that's brilliant, that's against my expectation, that's different, it's weird, it's balmy, it's cool. If it works for you, that's great, and it clearly works for a lot of people. I was just sitting there going, what is this guy doing?
Score, Dave?
Look, I'm giving it a C, which is higher than I used to have given it. I have appreciated it more, but I can't go higher than a C.
I'm at 2.5 out of 5, so slightly higher than Battlefield, but not much.
Excellent.
So, Dave, I guess I'll jump in first on Curse of Fenric now. I was saying earlier, if you said to me, pick a story from this season to introduce someone to Doctor Who with, it wouldn't be Battlefield. But it would be The Curse of Fenric. I mean, it's interesting. Here we are again, on location, pulling from mythology, with soldiers, with fight scenes, all in very similar territory to Battlefield in some ways, yet it feels 100 times better than Battlefield to me. The Doctor's not all shouty in a way that feels embarrassing. Everyone's delivering a fine performance, from the bit players to the leads. This one just works, in quotation marks, just works. So, again, it's not a million miles from Battlefield in terms of the concept, but it's so much better in terms of what ends up on screen. And maybe I'll stop there. I've got more to say, though. Yeah,
look, when I put my Twitter poll up last night, the story that did get, I think, 49% of the vote was The Curse of Fenric, and the other stories all split the remaining 50% very much evenly between them. So this was head and shoulders the favourite of the fans. I had not watched The Curse of Fenric for a very long time.
Oh, okay.
And the reason is I was very, very ratty that when the DVD came out, it wasn't the extended version that we had on the VHS, which I think is kind of, in my mind, the definitive version. Because I can remember watching The Curse of Fenric in a room with fans. And yes, it looked spectacular. It looked great. It sort of was a really strong story. But there was a bit of a consensus view in those next few months of, none of this makes sense. None of this makes sense. What's going on? And I can remember watching it again when it was broadcast on the ABC a year later, watching it again just Monday to Friday, and just go, why did this happen? Where did that come from? And then it was only a couple of years later they released the extended edition VHS tape, and suddenly everybody said, wow, this makes so much more sense. That extra 9 minutes is all the explanation, and it's all the explanatory scenes put back in, and suddenly the whole thing makes sense. And it was absolutely brilliant. And I was a bit annoyed that that wasn't what they put out on the DVD. So I think I've very rarely gone back to it. It could be 10, if not 15 years since I went back and watched it, because I just kind of didn't want to watch the DVD because it wasn't the right version in my mind.
I thought it might have had those scenes like as one of those options to turn on or off. Maybe I'm thinking of something else.
It's got a DVD edit, and it's got the original broadcast.
Is that what it is? Okay.
I think that's what it is. But the Blu-ray has got the VHS extended edition.
On a separate disc.
On a separate disc. So that's what I watched. And having not watched this for possibly 15 years, I was absolutely blown away by how good this was. As a kid, I liked it. I didn't love it. I think it was just a little bit too dark, a little bit too adult, and some of the themes just didn't really make sense to me. Watching it now, in my early 40s, it makes so much sense to me, and the themes they're going for, the ideas they're going for, the threads they're pulling on are just wonderful. Ian Briggs is doing some wonderful writing. You're right, the acting's really good, the cast is good, the music is stunning. I'd forgotten just how good the music was. Yeah, there's more I can say, but that's my opening gambit.
Okay. Well, I'll pick up the thread that it's interesting, because if you do dig into the story, you still find bits that don't really add up. Not quite in the same way as Ghostlight, like I was sort of ribbing earlier, but because the story moves at such a fast pace, if you're not watching the, what do we call it, the special edition, the VHS cut?
Yeah.
And, this story was edited to within an inch of its life to make the episode length, and I believe had been cut at the script editing stage as well before they even filmed. So they'd had one go at cutting it, then they cut it again in the editing room. So there was even more they probably could have filmed, but didn't. Because it does move at this pace, it's easy to miss stuff, like how there's that family in the graveyard with the Viking names, even though the whole curse thing is about how the Vikings showed up and got killed off soon after landing in the UK. Even the guy carving the rune says, I'm going to die tonight. And it sounds very grand and dramatic, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. Did these guys come and get wiped out by the Black Fog? Or did they hook up with locals and have generation after generation of babies? It seems to be saying both things happened. The story needs both things to be true, but they seem incompatible to my mind.
Yeah, I picked up really properly for the first time on this viewing that the descendants, like for example the Sundsvigs or the Sundsvalls, whatever them,
yes,
one of them married into either Ace's family or Soren's family or something like that. So like that's why Soren and Ace are wolves of Fenric, because they're descended from the Vikings. And I think Soren says at one point, my grandmother's English or something, and she's obviously meant to be a Viking descendant.
Yeah. So picking up on that, the Vikings show up, do they? And they take some local women and have babies. Well, when this black fog comes, why didn't it kill everyone? Why did it only just kill the Viking guys, whereas the other people could go on and have more babies and end up as Ace in the future? I don't get it. I don't get that at all. Yeah.
Again, there's some stuff here that I think is very reflective of Andrew Cartmell's script editing, where Andrew Cartmell, as we know, was going for a very graphic novel type feel. And that meant that there is stuff like that where you put it on screen, and if you think of it as a panel in a comic, it's a great panel. It works really, really well. It maybe doesn't quite work as well on TV. And again, I mean, even though Cartmel's been the script editor now, he's in his third year, he still hasn't got the hang of how to ensure that a script is ready to fit into 24 minutes of television.
Yeah.
And you know, consistently, even in this season, stuff is just being cut and cut and cut because he's just left too much on there. As much as I love the Heimivores and as much as I love the Great Old One, I think, again, great costume, great monsters, the Great Old One does feel as though it's just an extra thing that's been thrown in that maybe if he was removed, things would make a little bit more sense and be left room to breathe, because he really does just sort of arrive, wander around, get lectured by Fenric, and then go, "Oh, you're a bit of a dick. I'm going to kill you."
Yeah.
And
Step into this room. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember as a kid thinking that was very, very anticlimactic as an ending. Like, the serpent's just like, "I don't like you anymore," and takes him to a room and gasses him. Of course, now as an adult, I appreciate so much more that that's not the conclusion. The conclusion is the moment where the Doctor has to shatter Ace's faith in him so she can stop believing in him, so that the Great Old One can come close enough to Fenric, etc., etc. It's all that's all very clever, and it's all very, very well worked out. It's a very, very emotional, impactful scene, and I really, really love it. But there's a lot going on.
Oh, there really is. Weirdly, the best narrative of the 3 stories we've had so far, I think, is probably Battlefield, despite how badly it comes across on screen. Fenric as a narrative, I think, is somewhere between that and Ghostlight, because I do think it has some issues. And then Ghostlight is just a dog with fleas, so it comes last. Yet this, despite just sort of being middling between those 2 stories, I think comes across as very, very, very watchable on screen.
Yeah, it's one of those stories where everything kind of came together. And look, it does have the explanation that Ghostlight does. So I think it is better than Ghostlight comfortably in that sense. It's not as linear and easy to watch as Battlefield, so I get what you're saying. But what does work here is, as I said, every aspect of the production just seems to have worked. The direction, the music, the costumes, the location, the weather's absolutely perfect for it. It just works. Everything works really, really well. And look, when Sophie was asked, "What's your favourite story?" she did the whole, I could never pick one. But whenever she wanted to sort of use a story as the standard by which to judge everything else, she would always pick Fenric.
Yeah, no surprise there.
Yeah. I'm giving it an A.
I'm giving it a 4 out of 5.
Ooh, 80%. Excellent. How good is Survival? That's my opening gambit. I absolutely love this story. I haven't watched it again for a while, but watching it back, I was just blown away. For me, this is my favourite story of the McCoy era, and possibly my favourite story of the 1980s. I think that 1980s Doctor Who culminates in this story, which is gritty, dark, scary, clever, different. It's got a cool alien landscape, and then around that you've got the production of just a wonderful score by Dominic Glynn. That electric guitar sound we just haven't heard in Doctor Who before works so well. You've got the paint box atmosphere for the planet, which they've tried it again in previous stories, and it was a bit off in Mind Warp, and it wasn't bad in Greatest Show, but here they can make paint box work, and it looks great. You've got those fire jets coming up through the water, and you've got Anthony Ainley as a restrained master. All of this set in a wonderful urban landscape. McCoy and Aldred giving perhaps their best performances, and Doctor Who ends with the Doctor returning a Londoner back to London, reflecting him starting by taking 2 Londoners away.
Not that that was planned that way.
Not that that was planned that way, but it just works out so well. I have huge time for this. I'm not blind to its faults, and we'll discuss them, but How Good is Survival is my opener. Where are you on it, Rob?
Well, of all the episodes in season 26... and I did say Curse of Fenric would be the one I would most recommend to people, this one feels the most modern.
Yes.
You know, Sylvester walking down a suburban street. Sylvester and Sophie going into a contemporary council flat and consoling a young girl. The cameo from Hale and Pace. Yes. All of this stuff was considered at least odd or much worse actually, by fandom back in 1989, especially the Hale and Pace cameo. People were losing their over that.
Yes.
But when you watch it now, you think, this is prototype New Who. You know, it really, really is. So look, yeah, this is really quite good. Ace meeting up with some old pals, that sergeant at the drop-in centre who is like every mad Scotsman you meet who's had a brush of military service and now wants to punch on with everyone. You know, yeah. We've all met that guy.
We all know that character who thinks that, you know, he's done a 2 week survival course and now he's, you know, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The cheetah people are quite an interesting idea. Like you said, I don't think it's perfect by any means either. None of these 4 stories are in their own ways, but this is very solid and very watchable, and I'll stop there.
I was surprised by how brutal it was. I think I'd forgotten that. Stuff like Mitch just plunging a tooth into a wounded cheetah is just really nasty.
Not that you see it.
Not that you see it, but it's implied strongly enough that it's there. You see shots of eaten cats. Like, you just wouldn't do that today.
Yeah, true.
You know, it's again implied that Mitch probably didn't kill his parents, but he probably drove away his parents, and that's a really nasty idea. This idea that this family's lost their son probably for 2-3 months, and suddenly he comes back and drives them away. That must be, you know, a really gripping sort of thing. So it's got these really dark ideas in there that I think are really, really effectively done. That survival of the fittest motif is really, really effective. Kara's death is really nasty. One of the Master's nastier real moments, and it's not done with a tissue compression limit over a laser. It's just him driving a knife into her.
Yeah.
You know, that's really good. But I want to really take a moment to praise the direction. I've long thought that Alan Waring is a real undersung, undercredited director in Doctor Who's history, and I think it's only because his big successes are in the McCoy era, where a lot of people weren't watching, or fandom was incredibly dismissive at the time, and he doesn't quite get the credit that, you know, others do. But the direction on this, the point of view shots are just fantastic. The way he uses the landscape of the Cheetah People's planet is really, really good. That moment where the camera is over Ace's shoulder, then just rises up, and then you cut to a little shot looking up at the cheetah on the horse.
Yep.
Just really, really good direction that just really adds to it all. I'm impressed by that.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, one of the overriding feelings I get when I watch this now, though, which I obviously didn't have in 1989 for obvious reasons, is that this is perfectly good Doctor Who, and yet the series is about to get whacked on the head. I mean, to go into all of that is an episode in itself. I appreciate that. So I just mentioned it here as a feeling I get when I watch this now. And I think about all the Doctor Who we could have had into the 1990s, maybe in some sort of parallel universe where it did continue on from this.
Look, I think that is correct. Look, maybe let's just wrap up Survival for a second before we go into some more general comments.
Sure.
Look, I don't have anything else to say. I think it's brilliant. I think it's Ainley's best performance. I think it's McCoy's best performance. I think it's Aldrin's best performance. Great direction, great look, great music. Everything works together. It is, as you say, the template for New Who. It's an A+ from me.
It's a 3.5 out of 5 for me, just a shade under Curse of Fenric.
Yeah, look, fair enough. So to cut back as we were sort of doing to a bit of our summation, I think that fandom is right about this season. This is the best season in quite a while. It's, I think, comfortably the best of the McCoy seasons. I don't think that's particularly contentious. I personally think it's better than the 2 Colin Baker seasons. I don't think that's hugely contentious, even if you like Baker. I think that you could say the production levels in this season are definitely better than what we had in Trial and definitely better than what we had in Colin's first season. Do you think it's the best season, sort of, you know, going back to Tom? Well, that depends on how you feel about the Davo era. I think season 21 is pretty good, so I'm not going to say that, but it is 4 very, very well-made stories, one after the other, and different people have different favourites and different least favourites, but they are all extremely well-made, which is just, let's be frank, unusual for those last few years of Doctor Who, and we've got to give it credit for that. Mm-hmm. I've got to give Andrew Cartmel credit for finding the writers that he did, and again, Ryan Munro, first story for the show. Mark Platt, first story for the show. Ian Briggs and Ben Aronovich, their second scripts, but also people that Andrew Cartmel found. So his thumbprints are all over this, and it does work. The one thing I will disagree with him, though, and I did watch the Endgame documentary on the Blu-ray after I'd finished watching all these stories, and that is I think the second best documentary that the DVD range did. I think Trials and Tribulations on the trial set is the best, but this is a very close second. And I agree with a lot of what Andrew Cartmel was trying to do and trying to say in this season. The one thing I disagree with him about is he was saying that the Doctor had become, or the Doctor wasn't powerful enough. The Doctor had become sort of a wanderer and somebody that things happened to, and the Doctor needed to take control of his destiny. Now, I kind of disagree, because I think at the heart of Doctor Who is that idea that he is just a wanderer in time and space, and things do just happen to him. And I think that perhaps Cartmel was getting away from that. However, I will acknowledge that we're now 26 seasons into a TV show.
Yeah.
And so the idea of let's do something different is something that was worthy of doing. And even if I don't quite agree with Cartmel's direction or his reasoning on that, I totally get why he's wanting to shake it up. So that's why we do get the Doctor has set up himself as Merlin in the future. The Doctor has brought Ace to Gabriel Chase for very particular reasons to manipulate her. The Doctor has come to find Fenric, etc, etc, etc. And Survival's the only one where he just rocks up in Perivale and stuff happens to him in a very traditional Doctor Who way. And maybe it's that traditional Doctor Who format that just lifts it a little bit above the other ones for me. I think it's a very good experiment. I'm glad that they did it this time. I don't know if I'd like to see it continue the same way had they done season 27.
Very interesting. I've given my scores throughout this, so anyone listening will know I'm rating Curse of Fenric the best, Survival second. Then I think it's a bit of a drop down to maybe Ghostlight in third and Battlefield in the last place. But all of that said, if you were to read these as target novels, I think those bottom two would rise up quite a bit, and frankly we might see some of the positions shift a little. And in saying that, we might have listeners out there saying, well, Rob, that's the whole point. It's the story's stupid. Look past the velour seats in the Range Rover in Battlefield. Ignore Sylvester's inability to sound convincing when he shouts. Think about the stories. And in that sense, yeah, I rate Battlefield as a story over Survival as a story. But we're here to talk about, and we've been talking about what's on screen and how writing, actors, production also come together to make this cohesive whole, so that no matter what I think of the Battlefield narrative, it can't be better than Survival to me, because it just looks and feels so wrong so often. And while Survival has some limitations too, it's nothing compared to Battlefield on the screen. So I keep coming back in my thoughts to how what I think of the stories isn't quite what I think of the TV episodes. They're sort of separate in my head.
Yeah, look, I think that you do need to talk about the visuals, because all four stories, in my opinion, do look great. And I mentioned way back at the start of this episode how almost all of Barry Letts's Doctor Who never looks cheap. It looks like it's era, but it doesn't look cheap. And I think this was the first time for a long time that Doctor Who didn't look as cheap as he had looked. And look, television was starting to move on in the 90s. And again, it's a shame that just as special effects and CGI was coming down in price to the point where a show like Red Dwarf a year later could use it in a really, really effective way, and Doctor Who therefore could have as well. And suddenly maybe it could have done proper sci-fi within a BBC budget. It's just ironic that it went just as that budget and sci-fi and technology thing were all aligning. I think they do look better than Doctor Who's looked a long time ago. But I will also say they are four brilliant target novels. I think it's Mark Platt who actually does the adaptation of Battlefield, and he does a really, really good adaptation. I think it's one of the most common pieces of fan wisdom in fandom that the Ghostlight novelisation is brilliant and explains everything that isn't there on the book. Isn't on the screen, and that is correct. I remember reading that when I was 11 on a trip to Europe, in fact. And yes, suddenly I'm going, oh, I get it. It all makes sense now. Fenric is a top 5 Doctor Who target novel. Like, it's just fantastic, and it's one of those ones like Remembrance that goes off into these little vignettes about the background characters, and so you see Judson and Millington at school together and all that sort of thing. And and Survival. I mean, Rona Munro's a fantastic writer, and I love her other work for Doctor Who, Eaters of Light. I went into this asking the question, is season 26 as good as fandom says it is? I think the answer is yes. I think that McCoy's at his best here, but I know people love McCoy. He's not one of my favourite Doctors, and I do think there are moments hear where his limitations as an actor do come through. But equally, the production team has worked out how to write good McCoy. So they've worked out if you give him something dark and brooding and quiet, he'll do a really, really good job. If you give him something angry and emotive and excitable, he won't do as good a good job. So they've worked out how to write him. And again, they've worked out how to make good Doctor Who. It is not a coincidence that all 4 of these stories are set on Earth, and all of them at near contemporary or near past. And there's no big sci-fi stuff. Battlefield set 10 years in the future. Just enough to have a couple of jokes about the king and a £10 coin, and it's basically the present. Survival's the present. Curse of Fenric's World War II and Ghostlight's Victorian, because they've worked out. Ben Aronovich has said this in the documentary. They've worked out. You say to the BBC, do a Victorian, and they go, great, we'll just go and open the cupboards and bring all of these props and all these costumes and all these sets and everything, and it looks fantastic. You say to them, go 10 years in the future, and it looks terrible. They've worked out how to do Doctor Who for this cast on this budget, and they've nailed it.
Yeah, I enjoy this season, Dave. I've seen it start to finish many times over the years, and as I said at the start, it's from pretty much my Imperial phase in fandom.
Yeah.
And while I would never say McCoy is my Doctor, I do have a massive soft spot for his Doctor and Ace as a pairing, who I think work together the best of any Doctor companion matchup since probably Tom and Lalla. Probably. I think they work better than anything in Davo's era. I think they work better than anything in Colin's era. And this is their Imperial phase, so it's hard not to be terribly fond of this season as a piece of work overall, even if I have picked out issues here and there.
Everything that production team and that cast had been working towards for literally 3 seasons, 12 stories, does come together and does align. I think that it absolutely reaches its peak in Survival, and it's a terrible shame that it then has to stop.
Well said.
So thank you, listeners, for voting for season 26.
Yes, absolutely. It was no hardship to watch, I assure you.
Not at all. Now, at this point, we come to our letters, and Rob, we've had a bit of a chat offline because, thank you, listeners, we have had many, many emails come in. I think we've broken our podcast record, which is fantastic because we love to hear from you and we love that listener involvement. The only problem is it would add about half an hour to the podcast if we read every line of every email. So we have properly agonized over this, and we have made the editorial call to truncate a couple of these emails because we do love hearing from you, and we do regret having to do this, but we are very aware of the timing of our podcast. We're very aware of how long each segment goes for and how long we talk about things and how long the full package is, and we don't like it blowing out over a certain time. So for this time, for the first time, we're going to truncate a little bit. If you hate this, please give us that feedback and we can sort of throw it around and see what we're doing, because we don't like doing this, but I guess we're going to try it and see.
Yeah, we're going to take the best from each letter and try not to lose any meaning and run with it, see what happens.
Too easy. So, Rob, do you want to start with the first one that opens, Dear Rob?
Okay, Dear Rob, I attended the Sirens of Audio Sophie Aldred event a fortnight ago, and they screened your I Was a Teenage Time Lord special. I can actually remember this when it was screened, and remember it live after school. I would have loved to have been on it, and thought I was one of the few Doctor Who fans out there. I thought, who are these people, and where did they come from? I didn't realise there was some kind of Clipgate controversy when the answers were given away before the broadcast. I thought you acquitted yourself well, as you look like a cricketer, and someone who would have been on our school's footy team. Probably also aided and saved from ridicule because you didn't wear the celery stick. Well spotted. It's nice that you still stuck with the show over the years. I think at the time I had just discovered the Doctor Who Fan Club of Australia and attended my first convention, Console 88, with Katie Manning. I went with a school friend. Doctor Who wasn't as popular or acceptable as it is now, and there weren't too many Aussie fans, well, at least to me at the time. Anyway, I just want to say thanks for the blast from the past, which was a little corny at the time, but so worth it to mention and promote the show. I didn't think I'd see the quiz again, and probably missed a lot of what was going on because I was excited to see Remembrance of the Daleks screening right after it. Cheers from Anthony. And cheers, Anthony, for watching the video at the Sirens of Audio event. I'm very happy when anyone watches something I make. And yes, Console 88 was one of my first big conventions too in Sydney, so that's quite neat.
Oh, there you go. I didn't see that one because I was in Melbourne.
Correct.
Our next email comes from Steve Clamp, who writes, "Hi Rob and Dave, I hope all is well. We've spoken over Twitter a few times, just wanted to get in touch before your Season 26 review. Since finding your podcast about 2 months ago, I've listened to no less than 22 of your shows.
Wow.
Impressive. Most are lengthy ones too. Love them all, and most of my views matched with yours, which is a bonus. Season 26 is so special to me. I only started watching Doctor Who in 1987, when my older brother convinced an 11-year-old me to watch The Regeneration. So my first episode was Time and the Rani Part 1. I adored it. And the great thing was, it turns out nearly all Doctor Who is better than that. So Season 24 made me a fan. Season 25 blew my mind, especially Remembrance of the Daleks, of course, from that almost Star Wars-esque opening shot to the "Time will tell, it always does." It was something really special. Then, after a long wait, with just my Betamax recordings of Season 25 to live off, 26 came. At the time, Battlefield was a little disappointing for me. After the big budget look of Remembrance, this felt quite cheap, especially the awful spaceship model and the sparkler guns. And the dreadful Part 1 cliffhanger. But now I can ignore those elements and I adore it. Great characters, the Brigadier, who I had no previous reference for in 1989, and lovely touches of light and shade. Ghostlight followed. In 89, I didn't really understand it, but I liked the creepiness, and now, as an adult, it's an absolutely wonderful piece of television. Then the Curse of Fenric. I love this so much. It's a straight tie with Remembrance to be my all-time favourite Who. McCoy wonderfully devious. The production looks big, expensive, and full of atmosphere. And what a cast! And then Survival. I really enjoyed this, but it's another that gets even better with age. How good is Sophie Aldred? I was lucky enough to present a TV show on the same station as her in the 90s. I had to hide how utterly starstruck I was. I even pretended I only vaguely knew she had a Who connection. To me, Season 25, even Silver Nemesis, and 26 are Doctor Who at its most consistently brilliant. Perhaps only matched by Season 13, or at a push, Season 7. Anyway, looking forward to your review. Keep up the great work, Steve Clamp. And look, Steve, I think you're right. Consistent is a word we haven't used, but probably should have. It's very accurate.
Absolutely. And if our UK listeners are thinking, oh, our local newsreader's called Steve Clamp, that is Steve Clamp from ITV who has written in. For some reason, the Doctor Who show has a lot of media types who follow us, especially newspaper types in Australia and Asia. And Steve follows us from the UK, working over there at ITV. And it's very interesting to hear these comments from Steve about the season, because he is contemporary to me and maybe just a few years older than you, Dave. And I think a lot of what we were saying comes across that at the time episodes were like this, but now with time we think of them differently.
Yeah, they have definitely aged very, very well. A lot better than a lot of other 80s Who, dare I say.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Steve, for that. I have an email from Nick in Tasmania who posts as Baby Hoovian on Instagram. If anyone out there follows Baby Hoovian, that's Nick from Tasmania. He says, "Hi, Rob and Dave. Just listened to your Mandalorian Series 3 review, and I've got to say I was similarly disappointed in the show. It felt like in seasons 1 and 2 the characters drove the plot, but this time around the plot was driving the characters. For me, the relationship between Mando and Grogu has always been the highlight of the series. Series 1 came out when my son Leo, the baby Hoovian, was born, and I could really relate to Din being thrust into fatherhood and the upheaval it causes. I think Grogu does develop his character. He's now a toddler, and nothing demonstrates this better than him gaining the ability to say no, cheekily and defiantly. Finally, a point on the show being about Din and not Bo-Katan, as the name of the show is The Mandalorian. Could the plural of the species actually be Mandalorian, meaning the show is about their whole people and culture? Just a random thought. As always, love the show and all the side quests that come with it. Nick from Tasmania. Well, Nick, I will say in that Mandalorian episode, I did comment that they should have called it The Mandalorians, because I think that would be the plural of Mandalorian.
I'm kind of blown away by that insight, much the same as when I was, about 30-something, and suddenly realised that Return of the Jedi didn't mean Return of the Jedi plural. It meant Return of the Jedi Anakin Skywalker singular, and had completely misunderstood that title for about 35 years.
That's all right, Dave. That's all right.
We have one from Neelers in Carrickfergus, Northern Ireland. Lovely little part of the world, Northern Ireland. I went there in December one year. It was a little bit cold, but lovely. You feel history in Northern Ireland.
Well, some of my family's from there, Dave.
Well, there you go.
Yes.
He opens, what about your fellas?
This needs an accent. Can you do an accent?
It's Northern Ireland, so it's the sad version of Irish. Like, what about your fellas?
There you go.
Hope you're well. I won't go any further like that. I'm currently on a train from Newcastle upon Tyne to London to watch Arsenal. I've been away all weekend and I'm seriously hungover. But here I am listening to your take on Mandalorian Season 3. What a hangover cure. And I'm loving it. Agree with so many of the points you both make, albeit I did still enjoy the series, but I do think it was weaker than the previous two. Also agree that the whole Grogu arc has run out of steam. But anyway, I'm going to crack open another can here and enjoy the rest of the show. Looking forward to the upcoming shows and hearing about Dave meeting Sophie Aldred. Take care, guys. Neelers in Carrickfergus.
Lovely stuff. Have one on me, Neelers. I think I wrote that back at the time.
Nice.
And to round us out, we have an email from David Harmsworth, who's going to talk about 3 of our recent episodes. Hi, Rob and Dave. Hope all's well down under. I've just completed the 3rd episode of the epic Alternate Galaxies trilogy that you and Dave recently recorded, covering Ultraviolet, Picard Season 3 and The Mandalorian Season 3. First off, that's a very impressive run rate, so thank you for finding the time for all this bonus content. Also, as ever, they were 3 really fascinating and thought-provoking discussions, which prompted me to share some spoilery thoughts of my own. Episode 1, The Vampire Menace, Dave. I loved Ultraviolet when it originally aired, and having now rewatched it for the first time since, I actually felt it stood the test of time pretty well. I nostalgically really enjoyed the heavy X-Files influence with so many dark scenes, in both senses of the word, and the overall bleakness of a bigger picture that we don't fully see and our heroes maybe can't fully address. I love the cleverness and thought that was put into how leeches, would work in the modern world, and I relished the lack of heavy-handed exposition. Your differing takes on Mike's character arc, lack of, especially got me thinking. For me, all 4 of the main team are compelling characters because each, in their own way, is damaged. I also didn't mind that the quartet largely end the series unchanged. Pierce aside, having faced up to his cancer diagnosis, a subplot I'd forgotten, but which resonated with me on rewatch because of my own diagnosis. For me, that lack of change just leans into the consciously bleak tone and underscores that the battle between humans and Code 5s is a war of attrition that's far from over. My only real gripe is the daftness of Jack's clothes being resurrected along with his body in the finale. Surely they could have got away with a more plausible naked Jack with careful camera angles, and then implying he's nicked a new suit by the time he taunts Mike at the end. Ironic, given that Joe Ahern later managed it with a naked, different Jack in Bad Wolf.
All good points.
Yes. Episode 2, he's called this one Attack of the Changelings.
I see where he's going, yes.
I do too. Totally agreed with your joint take on Picard Season 3. One aspect which stood out for me was calling out the challenge of reconciling the 2 characterizations of Picard across the TNG series and movies, the one who thought his way out of problems and the one who fought his way out. I'd never clocked that before, but it really clicked into place after this podcast. Much as I undeniably love the fan service of the later episodes as the whole TNG crew reunited, I actually preferred the first few episodes where the situation was so desperate and the peril and tension felt much more real. Genuine, how do they get out of this moments, and who's behind all these mysteries? Whereas, sadly, it's not hard to be a bit bored by the Borg now, and once everyone's on the Enterprise bridge, it soon feels locked in that we're headed for a heartwarming ending, where everybody lives, mostly. Plus, the plot holes come thick and fast once you stop feeling and start thinking. How did they fly a whole starship with just a few of them on board? Overall, I really enjoyed the ride, and it was a big step up from the first 2 seasons. And it's always a joy to have Patrick Stewart on our screens.
All correct.
Into our final, episode 3.
What's this one called? Revenge of...
The Moff.
Okay.
Again, what you and Dave had to say about Mando Season 3 eloquently and passionately summed up most of my own take on the show. It did feel very disjointed and badly paced. I'd have loved to see the rushed storyline of the final 2 episodes given more breathing space over perhaps 3 or 4 episodes. As you said, the season was schizophrenic as to whether it was a set of standalone adventures or had an arc. In that respect, it reminded me somewhat of 7A and 7B of New Who. Quote, we're moving away from complicated arcs to have Monster of the Week episodes, except we're going to drop Clara, well, one version of her, into episode 1 as the start of what turns into be possibly the most confusing arc yet. End quote. I do have a different take on Din Djarin's personal character arc, though. I know what you mean about feeling shortchanged when your kick-ass hero suddenly gets sidelined, but arguably, when we first meet this hardened, cynical loner, it's not necessarily a life he loves. So actually the idea that over time he does the wolf cub thing with Grogu, then partners with a buddy in Bo-Katan, and yearns for a family community, more Mandalorians, and ultimately wearily wants to take a bit of a step back from his old life, it sort of makes sense. And call me old-fashioned, but I got a real sense of closure and happiness from the final scene on Mando's farm. So I'd almost argue that both Mando and Grogu's story should stop there, and Season 4 should reboot the franchise along new lines. My fear, though, is that whatever they do with Season 4, it will suffer from being a slave to setting up the other series and future movies. This is the way, from David Harmsworth.
Thank you for all of that feedback, David. And yes, it was a bit of a, I won't say a slog, because it was fun, but it was a lot of time and work to put together all those extra episodes.
Yes, we won't be doing that in June, for example.
No, we won't, although we will be back to talk about Sophie soon.
Yes, we will.
So thank you once again to everybody who wrote in. Please do write in. Please do keep writing in. Please don't be put off by the fact we've had to truncate a couple. We will try to find the balance and try to keep as much involvement as we can. We do appreciate your comments here and on the social media.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, next month, Rob, we are going to do one of those topics which I really enjoy. Once every year or so now, we like to talk about one of Doctor Who's writers and their particular work, which is something that I find really fascinating. But we thought we were due to go with a new series writer, and we were chucking around who to do. And, you can't really do RTD or Moffat or Chibnall because they've written so much. They're showrunners more than they're writers. Yeah. And then we thought, let's do Mark Gatiss, because as I think we'll discuss next month, he's a fascinating writer, because I think every Doctor Who fan has a list of 2 or 3 Gatiss stories they love and 2 or 3 Gatiss stories they hate. But those lists are very rarely the same between any 2 fans.
He is Mr. Marmite.
He is, but not consistently. It's a different flavour of Marmite for everybody. So I'm really looking forward to going back and looking at some of his work and talking about Mark Gatiss, the writer, on Doctor Who.
Yeah, you didn't need to twist my arm on this one, Dave. I'm looking forward to it too.
No, absolutely. I might even try and reread one of his books if I can in the next few weeks.
Whew, that'd be pushing it for me.
Yeah, that might just be something I'll do and I'll make comment on. There's no obligation there.
Okay.
So, look, we've talked about season 26 tonight. We'll be back with Mark Gatiss next month. We will, of course, have our usual list makers coming up in a couple of weeks' time. This time talking about the top 5 story scores. We do plan to be back sometime in the next week with our Sophie Aldred chat. But until then, you've been Rob.
You've been Dave.
And we'll speak again soon.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to
The Doctor Who Show with Rob and Dave.
Find us online by searching for
The Doctor Who Show.
We also love it when you write in. Drop us a line anytime at hello@thedwshow.net.